My name is Alex Prynne, and I've been working on rock music magazine for my AS Media Foundation portfolio. For this rock music magazine, I created a front page, contents page, and double page spread. I chose to do a rock music magazine as I both enjoy reading them and found that there was demand for this particular product. Who would be the audience for your media product? Through conducting my SurveyMonkey, as well as through doing some secondary research, I discovered the important information about my primary target audience. I found out that most would be in social grade D to B, meaning that they would not be completely upper class or lower class, though they would still have money and interest in a higher quality and possible higher intellect product. I also found that these people would be aged between 16 and 25, meaning most of them are much younger students who may expect a higher quality product but would expect it at a lower and more affordable price. I also found that these people would be of any sexual orientation, though the majority would be straight, meaning the magazine must be able to attract all these people. I've also found out that primarily the audience would be of white British ethnic origin, as well as being from Britain, as this is where my magazine is produced, and so it must attract these people. The primary gender for my product will be male, however, I will also have a secondary target audience that will consist of females of white British origins as well as from other ethnic origins. I'm now going to discuss how my cover, contents and double page spread develops and at times challenge forms and conventions of real media products in a number of ways while attracting and addressing and representing my audience. Because I had never made my own cover, contents and double page spread for the rock genre before, I needed to start my project by researching successful existing examples because, as Bentley said in 1997, the creative process is rearranging the old to create the new. When I started the creation process of my magazine, I first made my masthead. I began by looking at different mastheads from existing products such as Q, Kerrang and Classic Rock. The mastheads I looked at filled about a sixth of the page, either at the top or a sixth of the left-hand corner. For these, they mostly used modern or urban-styled typography. I decided upon using this as this was what I found would be best for my primary target audience as well as for my secondary research. They also used colours such as black, white, with red or green to represent and attract the target audience. My masthead follows conventions as it uses the title R&R and is of similar length to others. From looking at these, I found that one of the common conventions was that they use bold wording with words which will normally relate or show a link to the rock genre. Examples of this are Classic Rock and Kerrang. The masthead I chose to use represented my target audience well. This is because it fits in with Hall's theory of youth representation from 1904. My masthead followed this theory as it uses colours such as the fiery colours, which would suggest it was more rebellious and dangerous, so fits the theory of youth being extreme and in need of excitement. My masthead represents the target audience well and so will be attractive as it uses the ideas that I found and researched from my target audience. My masthead follows common conventions as it uses similar colours and typography styles. However, some of these conventions are broken due to the way it has been presented and positioned on the cover. It also breaks conventions as it's shorter than most found on existing rock music magazines. The next thing I did was to design and create the layout for my front cover. I again looked at the layout of the same existing magazines, Q, Classic Rock and Kerrang. From these I found that the common conventions for the layouts of a rock music magazine are that they have the masthead at the top, normally central. They also have the main story central, either in the middle or at the bottom, with a normally bold title and bright colours. The rest of the stories are normally placed in columns along the sides of the page. The image will then be placed in the centre of the page. I then created some flat plans with my ideas for the cover based on my findings in the research. After that, I presented them to the target audience and allowed them to pick the one they thought best for the cover page through SurveyMonkey. This allowed me to create a final product which would attract and well represent my target audience, as this is the cover which they had chosen themselves. I think that this also follows the conventions of rock music magazines well, as it does It does, though, break some conventions through having very little down the right-hand side, with an image which takes up much more of the page than normally seen. My cover also has a corner masthead rather than a central one, which again breaks conventions. After I had decided on a layout, I then went on to create a colour palette. I, like for the masthead and the layout, began by looking at the colour palettes of existing products to find the common conventions within the rock music genre. In my research, I found that nearly all of the time the colours black and white are used in some way. The covers also commonly use red and sometimes green. These are all commonly used throughout rock music magazines as they fit with the theory of use by Hall, where red is seen red is a colour seen as being rebellious, as Hall describes youth. The colour black is also closely linked to depression, which was also used to describe the use by Hall. I decided to use black, white and red for my cover, as it was the common convention and fitted well with the style I wanted to create, as well as the images being used. On the cover page for my product, I decided to use a close-up shot, as this is what I found was used on most cover pages for a single subject. When I looked at the existing magazines like Q, Kerrang and Classic Rock, I decided to use a younger male for my star vehicle, as this would represent who the target audience were. For the photo, he was wearing a t-shirt like one a rock musician may wear, as well as having longer hair, which is common in the rock genre. Both my star vehicle choice and the image work well at representing the target audience, due to it following the stereotypes that are discussed in Hall's theory. This is due to the fact that it is shown in style to suggest that he was rebellious, and is being shown in the look of someone who may commit a criminal act. However, the image also breaks common conventions of the genre, as it shows a star vehicle who is much younger than those who can be found in the same style on most rock music magazines. My choices for the typography and lexis found on my magazine were all made due to my research, finding out what may best represent my target audience. I did this research by looking at example magazines. These were Q, Classic Rock and Kerrang. I found that most often these magazines used typography styles that could be described as modern or urban. To follow these conventions, I mostly used typography styles that are modern in their look. To make sure I was using semantic fields that related to the rock genre, I used my title, R&R, as part of this convention. This title is made from the initials of rock and roll, and so links in with the genre, therefore representing my target audience. When I was choosing the right typography styles, and most of the lexis, I followed Hebridge's theory of youth, that youth is portrayed as fun, and so used the lexis and typography styles that would not represent them negatively, and show that they are too fun, and not at all dangerous and not always rebellious. When I was researching, I found that all existing magazines will include a price, issue number and a barcode somewhere in the cover, usually as a small box in one of the lower corners. What do you think worked well looked professional? I think that for my cover page, the layout and its colour palette both worked well on this cover, as it followed the conventions and it worked well along with the image that was being used, which itself worked well with the style I had wanted to create. What would you improve on the cover that didn't look professional? On the cover, I would improve the actual photo to make it clearer and more professional overall. I may also just slightly alter the layout so the bottom half did not look like a square and give it more shape. Although it does work well, it could still be improved to give it a better look and style. When beginning to create the contents page for my magazine, I again looked at some successful examples that already existed. The main convention that was obvious is the large word content somewhere near the top of the page. I followed this convention using the same word at the top in the same way a professional one may. When looking at these examples, I found that the typography style that they used for the word was usually one that would fit into the genre or the style of the magazine. This means it will either be a more modern font or a slightly more stylized and elegant one. It is also clear that they would use a range of images that are normally a wide shot of either a single artist or a band. They also had the page numbers in a large font size, normally similar to the typography style of the word contents, with a colour of usually red or the other main colour, apart from black and white, featured throughout the magazine. They would then include a list of stories which would attract the target audience, as these would follow the stories and artists that they were interested in. I did though break the conventions that I have found with the use of a typography that is not commonly used within the genre, as well as through the layout that I used, which is generally different from many of the other magazines' layouts that are currently available. It is clear that the contents page I created works well at representing the target audience, as it follows the theory of Hall in 1904 and Hebridge in 1988, that says they are represented as being rebellious, criminals, and troublemakers. The layout and design I created for the contents page is created in a professional way. However, if I were to look at it to make it look even more professional, I would change the image that I used, as it is not fully in focus and has a shadow passing over the model, though I think the image does look as professional an image I could have created. Another thing about my contents page that doesn't look professional is the editor's letter, which does not really fit into the look or style I was trying to create. For my double page spread, like the other two pieces, I began by doing some research by looking at existing double page spreads from magazines like Q, Kerrang and Classic Rock. From the research I found that all of the ones I looked at had a large bold title, which is at the top of the page, and is usually central, either on a single page or across both pages. The title will be a large and bold typography style that can vary greatly from the other typography being used in the magazine and even on the page. The typography used is related to the individual artist and their style, and may often incorporate the same or similar typography using the artist's logo or other associated texts. The spreads that I looked at all had a variety of different images in different places on the page. Some of these pages had single images and others had multiple images. There is not really any clear common conventions regarding the images that can be found on a double page spread. The double page spread, much like the other pages, all have a 3-colour palette, 2 of which are always black and white, the third colour is then nearly always red. Most double page spreads will normally follow the colour palette of the cover and contents page. However, this does not always happen, and sometimes each individual spread or story will have its own colour palette, or third colour, as it nearly always consists of black, white and another colour that may contrast with the main colour or blend in well with it. The layout of a double page spread, like the images, can vary greatly. However, there are more common conventions for the layout than there is for the images. From my research, one of these common conventions I found is that all of the text is set out in columns. This is always the case. For my own double page spreads, I followed all these conventions that I found from the research in terms of the layout, colour palettes and for the title. These conventions were broken by my use of the layout with the image and the article. However, for the spread there was not much in terms of conventions that I did break. It is clear that my double page spread works well at representing and attracting my target audience, as, like all the others, it follows Hall's theory of youth, as it features a younger male who looks rebellious and may also be a criminal, as it shows him in darker colours like the black makeup, with a pose that is linked to the rock genre and being more rebellious. Through the research I found that there are multiple article types that can be found in a double page spread. Such article types would include ones about history, interviews incorporated into a large text or story, and a Q&A. For my spread, I decided to do a Q&A as this is a common story found and allows an easy incorporation of lexis linked to the rock genres, such as ones that link to the music or lifestyle like drugs, which again will follow Hall's theory of youth being rebellious. What kind of media institutions might distribute your product and why? There are multiple media institutions which publish magazines such as rock magazines. One of these institutions is IPC Media. IPC Media is a British publishing company which was formed in 1963 after 3 of Britain's leading publishing companies merged together. IPC Magazines was then formed in 1968. This was part of a reorganisation that created IPC newspapers, IPC magazines, IPC books, IPC printing, IPC trade and technical, and IPC new products. In 1970, IPC Mirror Group was taken over by Albert E. Reed, a paper-making company. This was later renamed to Reed International. In 1974, there was a later split into IPC Magazines Limited, and then into Mirror Group newspapers. The second was then sold to Pergamon Holdings Limited. IPC Magazines was then sold to Time Inc. in 1998. and was then renamed to IPC Media. This allowed both IPC and Time Inc. to expand and grow with this buyout. IPC Media have multiple competitors, the main ones being Advanced Magazine Publishers Inc. and H. Bauer Publishing Limited. IPC Media publish magazines like M&E in the rock music genre, and other magazines like Rugby World and TV Times. For my own magazine, I think I would have IPC Media as my distributors, as they do not have many music magazines apart from NME and Uncut, and so would have a slight gap within their market.
Before I began this AS Media portfolio, I had some experience with media technologies before, mostly through doing GCSE media before. In this, I had already had a little bit of experience using Photoshop to create magazines. When doing it this year, I have improved greatly on my skills in the use of Photoshop. Before creating my magazine, I used multiple different social network sites that would allow me to reach my target audience. One of the main sites I used was SurveyMonkey. This was a site I had no prior experience to using it, and so I learned a lot about creating surveys online using social networking sites like Facebook and Twitter that would allow my target audience to fill them in, and so I could find out what they would most want to see and what would best represent them. Another form of online media I used was Blogger. This was the site that I used most. This was because I had to post all of my work for an online portfolio to allow people like my teacher and people like my target audience in the exam board to see the work. As I had not really used Blogger at all before I began this portfolio, I learned a lot about using it by adding and creating posts and links to my work found on other sites like YouTube and Prezi. Prezi was another site that I had no previous experience in, allowing me to learn how to create the layouts and edit it before posting it onto my blog. When using YouTube to upload videos like my evaluation, I did already have some experience in before, due to already having created my own channel and uploading my own videos. Because of this previous experience, I already knew about some of the problems that there were with YouTube, like the amount of time it could sometimes take to upload and process a video. While I mostly used technology that existed online and on a computer, I also learnt and improved upon my skills with things like the Canon 6D camera. Whilst I had previously used a digital SLR camera, I had not used one of this quality, and so I had to improve my skills of both using this type as a camera and then also learning how to use this particular camera. Looking back at your preliminary task, what do you feel you have learnt in the progression from it to your full product? When I compare the work that I created for my prelim task with my main task, it is very clear that I have learnt a lot about using things like Photoshop, lighting and the use of camera. The main thing that is clear I have learnt is my use of Photoshop, as well as the knowledge I have about the way a magazine's cover and contents page is laid out. This is obvious as my prelim task has a poor layout for both the cover and the contents page, and the cutting out of the images I used. When I went to make my main task, I improved upon this by practicing my cutting, as well as designing my work in a way that would allow me to avoid this as much as I possibly could. This allowed me to create a piece of work that would allow it to look as professional as I could make it. Another thing that is clear that I have improved upon is my photography skills. In my prelim task, the lighting for most of the pictures were quite poor. This lighting was not really properly set up, and much of it looked too warm and did not look at all professional. The photos that I used were not all properly in focus, and so again did not look professional. Overall, I think I have learnt a lot about using Photoshop to create these parts of a magazine, and I have also learnt a lot about the layouts and ideas behind all the aspects of a magazine. I have also greatly improved upon my photography skills, making sure they're all in focus and the lighting is correct.